Welcome, fellow learner. We love it when you send us sources that really challenge our typical approach.
Yeah, this one is different.
It really is. Usually, we're deep diving into these pretty structured academic papers, market analyses, or, industry reports.
Mhm.
Today, we are wrestling with something else entirely. It's a highly stylized, almost mythic expose.
That's the perfect word for it.
We're talking about issue 9X of Magazine, which was published late last year.
And this is, it's less a deep dive into an article and more of an excavation, I'd say.
An excavation, I like that.
The source frames a really technical medical topic, we're talking advanced hair loss treatment, as this dramatic, almost theatrical confrontation. They call it the sovereign simulation.
And it's a conflict waged between these two forces, right? Dr. Sewell on one side.
And this institutional power they call Wanda on the other.
So our mission today is, well, it's straightforward, but it's also pretty complex. We need to strip away all the cinematic language, the Scarlet Molecule stuff, the riff terminology.
All of it.
We're here to extract the cold, hard core scientific claims and critiques being made about two very different approaches: the existing legacy treatments and a claimed new approach involving a molecule they've dubbed SH1.
I mean, it's the ultimate synthesis challenge, right? We're basically asking, what's the real scientific argument hidden inside what feels like a comic book?
Exactly, a comic book. So let's start there. Let's define the battlefield. We are looking at the molecular terrain where SH1 is pitted against the existing methods.
Right, think finasteride and minoxidil.
So the source calls this the battle stage, molecular terrain. To really get this conflict, we had to define the key players at, like, the cellular level.
And that stage is the, quote, androgen receptor binding arena.
Okay. And what are the physical elements in that arena?
Well, there are three central biochemical components. First up, you've got the hair AR, which is just their shorthand for the androgen receptor that's located specifically in the hair follicles.
So these are like the locks that trigger hair loss if the wrong key gets in.
That's a great way to put it. And the key's trying to fit into those locks. That's where the other two components come in. The biochemical targets,
Which are?
T, which is testosterone, and maybe more critically, DHT, dihydrotestosterone.
Ah, DHT. The main villain in this story, usually.
It is.
Yeah.
These are the androgens that interact with the receptor, and yeah, DHT is the much more potent version. It's generally understood to be the primary driver of genetic hair loss.
Okay, so we have the receptor, the hair AR, and the androgens T and DHT. Now let's bring in the forces fighting for control.
Right. The source positions SH1 as Dr. Sewell's deployment. That's the proposed solution.
And on the other side.
Against it, you have finasteride and minoxidil, which represent Wanda's influence. Wanda is the stand-in for the entire established institutional approach.
With all its marketing, its peer-reviewed papers, and according to this source, its deep-seated flaws.
Exactly. And it's not just institutional. The framing is so academically dramatic. Dr. Sewell gets these incredible, almost satirical credentials.
I saw that. M.Sc, Ph.D., academic dean, and diagnostic architect of the Cosmic University of Echo Rift Studies NIAIX.
I mean, come on. He's clearly meant to represent the sovereign counterstrike and what they call sovereign diagnostics.
So if Sewell is this force of, I guess, counter-clarity, then Wanda is the opposite.
She's the force of obstruction. The source literally says Wanda represents institutional distortion and floods the terrain with something they call the peer-reviewed fog.
Peer-reviewed fog. Wow. That tells you immediately that the critique isn't just about the drugs themselves.
No, it's aimed at the entire system that validates and promotes them.
Okay, that's a powerful setup. Let's dive right into that fog. The next section is labeled the mythic diagnostic expose, and it launches this surgical critique of the legacy drugs.
Yeah.
So if Wanda is generating the fog, what actually makes up that fog?
The critique hits really hard at the foundational mechanism of drugs like finasteride.
The 5-alpha reductase pathway.
Exactly. The source calls it 5-alpha reductase solutions.
We should probably unpack that for you, the learner, if you're not, a full-time biochemist. What is 5-alpha reductase, and why is that the standard way to go?
In simple terms, 5-alpha reductase is an enzyme. Its job is to act like a transformer in your body. It converts the relatively milder testosterone, or T,
into the supercharged version, DHT.
Exactly. And since DHT is the main trigger for follicle destruction, legacy drugs focus on inhibiting that enzyme. They just reduce the amount of DHT your body makes, system-wide.
So the standard approach is to just turn down the tap on the main bad guy DHT everywhere in the body. So why does the source call this an illusion?
Because, the source argues, targeting this enzyme is inherently flawed. It's an illusion because while you might solve the DHT problem, you allegedly create a whole host of others.
Right. The core criticism is that these legacy drugs are repurposed.
And most critically, that the resulting side effects are then reframed as design.
That's a really severe accusation. To say that unintended consequences are deliberately minimized or just accepted as part of how the treatment works.
It is, and it brings us to the most dramatic phrase in their whole critique: systemic chaos.
Right. Wanda, the established approach, lashes back with this systemic chaos. And it's not vague, is it? It's specifically linked to two things.
Neurosteroid and VGF distortions.
And those distortions, the source claims, are the side channels that legacy ads never reveal. So for you listening, let's just quickly define what those side channels are and why messing with them would be chaotic.
Neurosteroids are crucial. I mean, they're steroids that function in your nervous system. They help regulate mood, memory, cognitive function. They're vital for brain health.
Okay, and how does a hair loss drug affect them?
Well, that 5-alpha reductase enzyme.
Yeah.
It's also present in the brain, and it's involved in creating some of these neurosteroids. So the systemic inhibition approach, the one designed to stop DHT, might inadvertently be messing with your brain chemistry.
So in hitting the enzyme everywhere to save your hair, you're potentially hitting these essential brain pathways too.
That's exactly what the source is alleging, that the side effects people sometimes report, mood changes, issues with libido, focus, they're not incidental. They're deep-seated systemic reactions.
From manipulating a foundational pathway that does way more than just affect hair.
Right. And then you've got VEGF.
Vascular endothelial growth factor.
Right.
Which, as the name suggests, has to do with blood vessels.
Correct. VEGF is vital for healing, for maintaining healthy tissue, and that includes the area around the hair follicle itself. The source suggests that messing with this whole TDHT hormonal balance can introduce distortions into things like VEGF signaling.
Which could cause issues that aren't immediately obvious or that you might blame on something else.
Precisely.
So that's a really powerful summary of the critique. The whole attack on legacy drugs boils down to this. They're too systemic, these are broad inhibitor, and in doing so, they inadvertently cause this molecular chaos in other essential unadvertised pathways.
It frames the whole institutional approach as a blunt instrument, one that sacrifices body-wide integrity for, localized hair retention.
Okay, so let's pivot. Let's transition to the sovereign counterstrike. Dr. Sewell deploys SH1. What is the fundamental difference in mechanism here? If the old way was systemic modification, what's the new way?
The difference is really a philosophical shift. It's a shift from modification to localization. SH1 is described as a wide-spectrum blockade.
A blockade.
Instead of trying to stop the creation of DHT throughout the body, SH1's precise action is to prevent any androgen binding, both T and DHT, to the specific hair AR itself.
So wait, it's not trying to change what the body is making at all. It's just putting a shield over the specific target on the head.
That's the perfect analogy. It's a localized blockade. It creates a molecular shield over the receptor, making the hair AR immune to whatever androgens are circulating.
A key word there is localized.
Absolutely. And that's why they emphasize it blocks all androgen binding.
Yeah.
If the receptor can't be activated, it doesn't really matter how much T or DHT is in your bloodstream. The hair follicle just stays safe.
And this inherent localization seems to be the core argument against that systemic chaos idea.
It is.
If the SH1 shield only exists at the follicle, it leaves the 5-alpha reductase enzyme everywhere else, including the brain, to just do its job normally.
Exactly. The argument is that this approach avoids those alleged distortions of neurosteroids and VEGF because it never touches the production pathway.
Yeah.
It only interferes with the final docking process at the very specific localized target site.
This is what they mean by restoring clarity where the legacy system introduces chaos.
That's the claim. And this mechanistic difference leads right into another huge point they make.
The gender-inclusive protocol. Why does this shift from systemic to localized matter so much for gender inclusivity?
Oh, it matters tremendously because legacy androgen targeting treatments are often contraindicated or have very serious warnings for women, especially women who might become pregnant.
Because if you systemically inhibit 5-alpha reductase, you're fundamentally altering hormone levels.
Right, which can have really significant developmental effects on a fetus. So those exclusionary constraints the source talks about are directly tied to the systemic nature of the treatment.
I see.
But the source claims that because SH1 is just a localized shield, a topical blockade only at the hair follicle, it doesn't cause those same systemic hormonal shifts.
And therefore, it's claimed to shield both men and women.
Replacing exclusionary constraints with sovereign inclusion. If that's true, it opens the treatment up to a huge demographic that was previously restricted because of safety concerns.
That distinction, the safety argument from localization leading to inclusivity, that might be the most powerful clinical argument in this whole dramatic narrative.
It connects the molecular function directly to public health. That's what a successful diagnostic claim is supposed to do.
Okay, we've spent a lot of time on the science, but we just can't ignore the infrastructure holding it all up. Why is this source using terms like Scarlet Molecule and Echo Rift and framing this whole thing as a sovereign simulation? It's just pharmaceutical science at the end of the day.
To get that, we have to zoom out and look at the intent. This isn't just flair. It's a very deliberate communication strategy.
And we know it's deliberate because they tell us.
They do. The source provides a sovereign diagnostic disclaimer that explains the whole framework.
And what does that crucial disclaimer tell us about what the authors are trying to do?
It tells us they are completely self-aware. They explicitly state that all their materials are authored as mythic infrastructure, cinematic indictment, and sovereign broadcast. They're using this high drama, this almost mythological language as a delivery system.
But why? Why create this whole dramatic infrastructure just to introduce a chemical compound?
Well, they explain the purpose. The infrastructure is designed to expose ritualized containment, actor convergence, and systemic erosion.
So they seem to believe that conventional scientific communication, the standard white paper or clinical trial,
It's so deeply entangled in that peer-reviewed fog of the establishment of Wanda that it just fails to communicate genuine innovation effectively anymore.
so the cinematic language is really a diagnostic tool, a way to bypass media filters and audience fatigue, a way to shock the system into paying attention.
That's the implication. They've framed the battle between SH1 and legacy drugs as this moral, structural conflict good versus institutional evil to make sure the underlying scientific contrast is felt, not just read. They want you to engage with the system around the science.
And it is important to note what they don't claim.
Yes.
The disclaimer also makes it clear the site is not affiliated with any government, political party, or activist group. They claim these interpretations are purely diagnostic tools. They're trying to convey ideas, not endorse a political movement.
Which brings us full circle back to the closing codex of the source, which is really their ultimate summary.
Institutional distortion, Wanda, warps reality, sovereign diagnostics, SH1, restore clarity.
The whole drama is just the container for a very, very focused scientific and systemic critique.
Well, we started in the cosmic university, and somehow we navigated the peer-reviewed fog.
We did. The key takeaway for you, the learner, is really understanding that stark, two-pronged contrast they're presenting. Philosophically, it's systemic manipulation versus localized shielding.
And clinically.
Clinically, it's the alleged systemic chaos of 5-alpha reductase inhibition, with its effects on neurosteroids and VEGF, versus the proposed clarity and gender-inclusive approach of a total receptor blockade right at the hairy R.
This deep dive has given us an incredibly detailed look at two different theoretical approaches to hair loss. But, maybe the most enduring lesson here is about communication itself.
I think you're right. The source defines this entire thing as a cinematic artifact of authorship. So if complex, maybe paradigm-shifting science believes it needs a mythic infrastructure and a cinematic indictment to effectively challenge legacy information.
And break through all that institutional noise.
What does that imply about the state of scientific funding, information dissemination, and public trust today? Is dramatic framing now a necessity for scientific honesty?
Something for you to mull or explore on your own.